So, good morning, everyone. Well, good morning. We understand each other. Thank you for joining today. So, for those who weren't here yesterday, I'm Céline Pere. I'm one of the two curators of the Food Art Film Festival, together with Mark Franck, who is also joining us today. We started the festival yesterday on this, so the whole festival has this big theme of utopia from dystopia and how we eat our way out of hostility. How do we face a hostile environment and use radical creativity to get like food, nutritious food, interesting food, and all the philosophy that goes behind that. Yesterday was a whole fermentation journey, basically, and today we're going to be more, I think, speaking about the resources. So basically, the soil, the plants, and the water. We're going to start now with a visit that we made in Tapijntuin Garden in Maastricht with Mark Franck, who is also joining us here. We recorded this visit for you to have a nice intro in the garden and how actually a garden in a city can bring people to be introduced to the wild aspect of plants. The documentary lasts approximately 15 minutes. And after that, we're going to have a Q&A with you, Mark and Marente, because both of you are pretty much into foraging, I think, and you both have quite an experience in wild plants, wild edible plants. So yeah, I want to talk more, and I think we can just now enjoy the little video. And see you after.
Well, welcome into Tapijntuin. It started in the fall or summer of 2014. And back then the garden was hard to find. This path was not here, these paths were not here. It was still just dismantled military terrain. It's a former military base. And so this is the only footpath people know from back in the day is over there. And there was a fence in between. The chair lady from the foundation, Stichting Tapijntuin, she wanted to create this place where people who live in the city can contribute to a communal garden, but a bit different than the normal communal garden. So everybody's contributing to the whole garden, not to one plot.
Would you say it's like a very productive, like how many people can eat from that kind of garden, or like is it really a production spot to have that? Or?
It's not the primary goal of a garden to be productive, as in trying to feed as much mouse as possible. The first goal of the garden is to let people experience and to connect people to whatever can grow in this climate. So in this case, lots of vegetables and fruits and herbs. So the people who work here, they either used to have a garden or they are living in the city and they want to gain some experience in gardening and they want to contribute. And so they come every week a few hours in the season, and altogether it's a whole schedule of 4 days of gardening. We have some veterans, I would say.
They teach each other.
Yeah. So every day has their own captain, so to say. So I guess the most senior people will teach the people with less experience. people get to know each other. Maybe some people are lonely, maybe some people are jobless temporary, and they can get a new social life here, or get in a new social interaction here.
So when the kids come, actually you have a tour in the garden, and then you have a cooking session.
Yeah, if we have kids, most of them are from local elementary schools, and they walk here, so they learn how to draw plants, just to look at plants. They learn how to experience, how to touch, how to smell, and how to describe that, to formulate their experience. And there's blindfold tasting, for example. Kids are in general more sweet orientated, which is fine. They don't like it sometimes, but sometimes it's always a surprise. Like if you have like a fennel, like there's a fennel there. Some kids like the taste of fennel, and they say it tastes like licorice, or somebody else told me it tastes a bit like toothpaste. So every kid can have their own association with taste.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
Rather than imprinting them what's wrong or right, or what's good and what's not good.
Yeah, that's true. Were the trees here? Did you plant it?
The most of the trees were here when I started working here, and they are part now of a permaculture lane, which is mostly perennial plants. And basically, the garden is structured as in two groups of plants, or we have the annual plants, and we have the perennial plants. And so here you see an alley with shrubs and trees, and some cover crop, and lots of wild plants as well. And so that's another phase in nature. That's more a succession as nature wants it to be. It's more extended, it's more wild, and therefore it's more sustainable, because it can better stand warm temperatures. It can better stand if there's a rain impact from heavy showers, and the soil is also covered all the time, so that's the best for the micro soil organisms.
I mean, they live with harmony with each other.
Yeah, it's more like we do less and we watch more, and that's also, it creates a lot of tension within the foundation, and also within for the visitors. They don't know what they're looking at. It's like they say it's chaos. They say like, what's this? It's bush. There are no rows with like just leek or just garlic. And so, of course, if you have no clue which plants are standing here, then it looks like chaos. Yeah.
How do you choose which plant you're planting here?
In general, the whole garden? Okay.
Is it a collective decision, or?
No, I do it. And basically, we talked about the perennial patches, and then we have the annual patches, and they rotate every year. So that's a classical system as being taught. So we have all the annual crops you can put them into 6 or 7 groups, and every year the group rotates from one patch to another patch. Every group of vegetables needs some kind of ratio in minerals, and if you would have it every year in the same patch, there would be like a disbalance in the earth. So if you rotate it every year to a different patch, you spread the demand of the vegetables. And then every group of vegetables also have their demand in nutrition. So most of the people add compost, or you add manure. and some vegetables need less, some need more, and so it's good to rotate that as well, to not over manure the soil or to deplete the soil.
Yeah.
And then there is the pest story that because we work with groups of vegetables, there's always some disease coming up, and diseases sometimes there's a residue of diseases and they can survive in soil in winter, but if you then rotate your crop from one patch to the other patch, then you will only come back in 6 years or 7 years, and so the residue is most likely not there anymore. I think it's good to have a lot of diversity, and with the mild winters we're having, it's good to take some lucky shots or to do some gambling, and to of course I sow crops that can stand frost, but I also sow crops that can't stand frost or can stand only a little frost, and so depending on the hardness of the winter, some species will die, which is fine, and some will survive. But the more diversity I have, the less impact there is, or the less damage there is if a crop dies. So diversity is a key thing. And now we had some more frost this last night, and so the Swiss chard died. It's frozen.
You could also be so disappointed that it's dying because you cannot eat it anymore, no?
Yeah,
That's okay.
it's okay. It's nature, right? I mean, I can't control nature. I mean, we have here 10 meters of chard, which is frozen now. Of course, it's a pity. It would have been great to harvest it for the food festival. Well, I think the chicory officially died last night, but that's okay.
Thank you again, Mark, for your visit. So we recorded this last week when it was super cold, as you could see it. And I have to say, as you understood in the movie, so it was a very tasty tour for us because we tasted the whole garden basically. And it's a shame that we cannot bring you all in the garden to taste it. So my invitation here, wherever you are, even if it's not in Maastricht, there might be some other people around you that are also in this practice of cultivating wild plants or working in that dynamic. And so I invite you all to look for these people and connect with them. And you can for sure ask for a visit and taste those plants, because so I'm just gonna have the taste testimony right now, but the wild plants are very, very tasty, usually even more than the other, when you saw the wild fennel, and there is also non-wild fennel in the garden, and we tasted both. The wild fennel was extremely sweet and tasty. So, and you also saw a lot of plants name in the documentary, and I just want to remind that we're going to edit all of these festivals in an archive that's going to be put online in January probably, so you'll be able to grab all the names of plants again then. So yeah, let's start a little conversation. If some of you have some questions to ask, yeah, so I see that there is a first question for either you, Marente, or you, Mark. Does it make sense to sow seeds according to moon phases?
I think that's one for Mark.
Yeah. It's a very black and white question, so I can't I don't have the proof if it's actually like making sense. This is the calendar of Maria Thun, if I'm not mistaken, which is, yeah, I think it's fine to live by that, but I can't, like, I don't think there's any science proof that it actually works, but I think as long as it doesn't harm, I mean, it's good, right? You can just try it out and see if it works and see if you can measure if you gain different experiences. Yeah, so it would be good to have like a biased group and a non-biased group, and then you can Mariette, yeah, and then you can measure for yourself.
Okay. I actually had a question for you, Mark, because so we visited last week, and I wondered what is now the schedule for you at this moment of the year, and do you already have like projects of new plants to bring in the garden next year?
Yeah, now it's the plants are resting most of the time because of the low temperatures now, and so the perennial patch, the permaculture lane, as I called it in the video, I will extend that a little bit. I'll order some either a soul or order some new perennial plants to create more diversity in this part of the garden. And some plants multiply by themselves, like the raspberries. They're almost too much. Actually, there are too much raspberries in the garden. So either we hand them out or we plant them somewhere else on the terrain. And these are typical works we do in winter when the temperatures are low and the plants are in rest. And then the whole annual story with the annual and biannual plants starts from March on.
Another question is, I was curious if you could tell something about edible wild plants in the city, outside of the seeds human deliberately planted. Yeah, there are actually quite a few edible plants in the city that you can really, actually, when you start learning about it, you see it everywhere after that, I think. At least nettle, I guess, but maybe you have a few more plants in mind to share?
Yeah, I mean, do you remember there was this thing a while ago, I think it was from the summer and it was still lockdown, or it was in spring, and it was called botanical crayoning, and you could go with your crayons and like mark wild weeds or weeds that grow in the city and just give them attention.
All right. Yeah.
It was a thing. It was pretty hot at some point. Everybody was posting stuff online. Mm-hmm. We also did it in Maastricht for another foundation I work for, and that's a very beautiful way to make people see what's actually growing around us. Although most of the time we don't see it, and most of these wild plants, a lot of them are actually you can eat them or they have medicinal value. So. Yeah, I think if you're curious, that's the only thing you need. If you have curiosity and you have a nice book to learn from, or an app nowadays, but I mean, and it's not the same thing as experience, then I invite you to go foraging in the city and to learn about plants. I'm not sure if you have to eat them straight away. It depends a bit on where they grow and who's passing and how the soil is.
Yeah, the thing is, in the city, there is all this pollution as well in the context. But like, I don't know, for example, last September, I would say, I saw like a shitload of wild rucola in my surroundings. It was in Pare suburb. It was everywhere. But actually, I didn't know if I could really eat it because all of the cars going by. But it's true that it's actually, there are a lot of them. And Celia is asking, what was the most exciting thing to cultivate and taste? How also do you practice seed collecting in the garden?
The most exciting thing to cultivate and taste. Well, that's it's a very hard question. It's like, what's your favorite food? It's like the paradox question. I think last year I tasted the Pao for the first time. And yeah, in English it's also Pao, which is I got some seedlings. I have some small trees now. They're like this big, but I also got the fruit to taste from a lady in Maastricht, and it's a bit like an avocado size, a bit bigger than an avocado size, and the filling of the fruit tastes a bit like mango and banana, and it grows in our climate. So I think that was the most exciting thing I've tasted last autumn. And now I'm able to plant these plants in the Tapijnttuin, and then they'll need a few years because they're perennials. They need a few years before they start blooming, and then at some point they will give fruits, and then all of them we can all enjoy these fruits, and they're not coming from the other side of the world then, which is more sustainable, of course. The other part of the question: do you also practice seed collection in the garden? Yes and no. I think what we collect are the seeds that are rasvast. I'm not sure what the English word is. Those seeds that don't cross with other plants. Like, for example,
cross-pollinate.
Cross-pollinate, right? Thank you very much, Marente. So I'll collect the seeds from those plants that do not cross-pollinate. Otherwise, we get a lot of wild varieties back, actually, and that means you get you don't get the same product as you were sowing before with the original seeds you bought. So it's mainly what we harvest is mainly edible flower seeds. So after flowering, we collect some. We save some flowers, and then after the bloom, there is the seed production, and we save some of those. And a lot of things actually happen by itself. Like many things we saw in the tour in the garden, like the lamb's lettuce and the fennel, it just goes by itself. If you just don't do too much in the garden, the seeds will drop and they will spread and they will sprout, and if the temperatures are right. So that means either in spring when temperatures are rising, or like lamb's lettuce, it will just start sprouting by the end of September or October if the temperatures are dropping. And then you just harvest the abundance of that without steering all too much and without putting too much effort in it. So it's also a matter of, I think, some appreciation and knowing what you can eat. Yeah.
Yeah, there is this sentence that you say in the video, we do less and we watch more. For me, it was really like a punchline, because I was like, yes, that's it. I guess this is all the philosophy, right? Yeah,
that's the whole thing. Yeah.
There's a question about fungi. What is your relationship with fungi in the garden? Do you consciously create or support relationships? And is there any mushroom that pop up that are also edible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fungi are very important, especially for the perennial plants, because they live longer. So as long as we don't till the soil in these patches, fungi will appear. And especially if you have mycorrhiza fungi, that's very important, because they have a key factor between plants and the other soil organism. They exchange. They're like the key between plants and the minerals that are in the soil. So you have soil life, and you have plants, and they all have demands. And mycorrhiza fungi, they connect plants with microorganisms. They actually transport nutrients from the soil to the plant, but on the other hand, the plant makes sugars and they transport it back via the mycorrhiza into the soil for other organisms. So it's a very important thing to stimulate fungi growth. And we do that by adding organic matter. So we collect autumn leaves in autumn in the terrain outside the garden, so from the city park. We add, sometimes we get some free wood chips from the municipality and we add that, or we compost some wood chips. So yeah, it's very useful for soil fertility and to build up organic matter in soils. But if you look at the annual plants, they're going to be way less fungi and it's more dominant with bacteria, and they don't need very little fungi. And especially if the more you till the earth, like you do with annual plants. We don't till the earth, but we do make like little seed stripes where we seed in. The more you work in the soil, the more fungi you will break, the more of the spores you will damage. So the less you do, the more fungi will appear, and the less bacteria will appear. So in the succession phase, first you have the annual plants. They are dominant with bacteria, and then if you move to perennial plants and shrubs and trees, they're more dominant. They work together with fungi, and there are way less bacteria in this stage of life. And we have a little hill in the garden, and underneath of the hill are old tree trunks buried. And we were so fortunate that at some point there were mushrooms growing out. What was the name of the mushroom? They were very expensive. Morius in Dutch.
Oui, des morilles.
Yeah, morels.
Morels, yeah. Which was a coincidence. We didn't plan it like that. They were not deliberately put into that wood, like with plugs. But we harvested them one year, and we sold them to a restaurant in Maastricht. But they didn't come back next year. So I guess over the summer the spores dried out and there was some dieback. So we don't deliberately grow mushrooms in the garden at this point.
Thanks. How lucky to get morels just like that.
Yeah.
Tasty surprise.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do a bridge between you and Marente, because Marente, you have a very wide experience in cooking. You are also running the food lab here in De Van Eyck. And I know that you cook a lot with wild plants that you forage. And I was wondering, what does cooking with wild plants brings in your cuisine? Like, is it about the philosophy? Is it about the taste? Everything, maybe both?
Well, that's like it's a wide variety of answers to that question. I think the starting point is the excitement of getting something that grows close to you or in your environment at the point where you might be. Like if you go to a new place, you might find all sorts of new things that are interesting to use. So that it's that excitement that you start with, that you've actually found something yourself that you can then bring to the kitchen. Then I think secondly, there's so many different flavors out there that you haven't tasted yet, and that are not part of your palate normally, because you know things from the supermarket and you sort of repeat yourself with that. But adding these sort of wild elements really gives you another sort of element to your cooking and to fermenting, to all aspects of cooking, which is really interesting, and gives so many new layers to cooking. Then it's a nutritional factor. There's a lot of sort of nutrition in wild plants, as you said before as well, more even than things that are grown commercially. And then it enriches your dishes either by these flavors or like the looks of it, like the aesthetics. So all aspects I find very exciting, and I enjoy a lot.
Thanks. I also enjoy your cuisine.
Thanks. I had another point about the about the wild foraging, that there's some notes about foraging wild is be careful where you forage. If there's dogs around, or wild animals like foxes, or like cattle, like sheep. If you forage where sheep poo, that can be very harmful because there's a parasite in their poo that can make you very, very ill. So be careful. Keep a note of that, and either forage higher than the ground level, or make sure that you're not next to the road or something like that. And then there's a really good book that I love. It's called The Forager's Handbook by Miles Irving. I can put that in writing.
Yes.
And that is so diverse and has a lot of warnings about plants, or how to use elements of plants or change them into something else that is edible. Because sometimes if you cook a plant that might be slightly toxic, you can eat them when they're cooked, for instance. So this book really walks you through all these elements, and it's handy. But there's lots of apps out there now too.
Cross-referencing as well is really handy.
Yeah, the cross-referencing in that book is handy too, knowing between the different species, or the overlap between species. So yeah.
Yeah, it's true that there are quite a lot of good practice to get when you enter the world of edible wild plants. Just don't go nuts in the forest and grab everything and just eat everything, because of course they are we're not the only one. We shouldn't forage everything. There are rules also to not like just take everything for yourself, etc., etc. And there is also, like, if you can write the reference you were mentioning, we can also give again the reference of Pascal Baudard books that are very very nice recipe books, where you can forage and ferment and cook quite a lot of things from the forest, especially. I'm going to write it right now. Question. What do you think about applications that are used to identify plants? Because it isn't that we get even more disconnected to the locals and knowledge and do it together. Yeah. Are the applications disconnecting us from the locals and knowledge? What do you think, Mark? Do you use the applications?
Well, I do use them if I'm in a nature reserve and I want to learn about a new plant that I don't know. It doesn't work on cultivated plants anyway. So if you have like vegetables that are cultivated, at least that's my experience, because they're not original wild plants. And yes, I do think, it's the good thing is people can learn something, and maybe the downside is that you're downloading knowledge basically through a medium, and not. The question is, do you actually learn from that, and do you actually create a relationship with the plant or the environment through the app? And if that's not being established, then you could say like it's even creating more distance than just learning about by being in the forest and learning about the plants and being with them. So I think the story around it, the plant, is very important, that you can create this connection. Yeah. On the other hand, it can be very accessible through an app. So maybe it's good in a first stage for people to get started, and then if you become more like a hardcore food forager, which I don't recommend people to do, then maybe you'll probably switch to reading books, and you don't need the app anymore, I guess. And yeah, well, about foraging, I would like to say I'm not sure how it is legally in Netherlands. As far as I know, it's not really allowed to forage, depending on who's owning the terrain. It differs per country, of course. We don't have this culture in Netherlands, and we have nature conservation areas which are protected because of their reasons. And I think what the goal is of a food forest, for example, or permaculture garden, is that we learn from nature and apply that knowledge and techniques into an acre or a garden, and harvest from that and eat from that. We don't want to deplete the forests as they are, because that is all necessary for the ecosystem there, for the birds and the insects and all other animal life. So we don't want to. It's good to learn from it, but be careful about how much you harvest and what you do to the soil and what the consequences are of your actions.
Mm-hmm.
It's better to turn a normal acre into a food forest rather than going into the forest and start foraging there. I think that's the main challenge at the moment in Netherlands, that a lot of farmers work with annual plants, and some are starting to see that it's not really a sustainable system, and there's a foundation that tries to help them to convert the land into perennial crops. And that's the best way, because I think at least 1/3 of all the surface and of all the ground uses in Netherlands is used for annual plants, for growing crops for food, for people or for animals, for livestock.
Sorry, I didn't finish my question and then it just sent.
No.
I guess I was just wondering, Mark, if you encourage like people that have spaces like gardens to plant more plants that can be not only for like not only for looking pretty, but for also having that duality of being able to be eaten, like edible flowers and so on. And if you think that that's better for the environment, to have a garden that kind of has that, also that I don't know, that action, or that is it better for the planet to have gardens that not only are plants that just look beautiful, but that also provide food for animals and for ourselves?
Difficult question in a way, with many answers. Well, we all have to eat, right? I mean, that's one of our basic needs in order to survive. So in that sense, it's good to grow stuff in your garden that you can actually eat. On the other hand, it's also good to have stuff in your garden which is not necessarily good for you to eat, but which is good for the insects, or to attract other animals, like hedgehog, for example, or a mouse. So I think a combination is good. And perennial plants are more sustainable. In general, perennial plants are more sustainable than annual plants because they live longer, and so fungi can establish themselves in the earth. So I think perennial plants are always better than annual plants in terms of sustainability. And then if you have the ornamental plants in normal gardens, most of them are cultivated, so they have different flowers, different colors, which are bred for people to look pretty. And then the question is, how much ecological value do they have for the ecosystem? So that's the big difference between cultivated ornamental plants and wild plants or cultivated vegetables. So there are all kinds of possibilities. So again, diversity is key, I think, but perennial plants are better.
Thank you.
Good luck.
For now, I'm just going around and seeing which gardens have some fruit so that I can forage. But hopefully in the future, I have my own garden.
I just wanted to make one note for anyone that has ordered the postcards that came together with this talk, which have 3 different plants of Mark's garden that he foraged recently with a recipe what to do with them. These cards unfortunately couldn't be printed because of COVID, so we'll print them hopefully in January or early February and send them over to you. Apologies for the delay.
Yeah, it's worth the wait.
I hope so.
Yeah, I saw that a lot of people joined after that, after the video. Again, this is going to be archived and you're going to be able to see it in January. And in the meanwhile, so you have the, this is the name of the garden that you can probably write to if you have any questions for Mark, or for if you want to join the garden as well, I guess, if you want to be part of this initiative. And again, also for those who are not in Maastricht, find also a garden around you. There's probably one. Well, thank you. There is no more question. I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Mark, very much for your time and knowledge. It's very precious. Thank you, Marente, as well, for your experience sharing. We can, yeah, that's a good idea. We could play the video again now that after the goodbye. For those who didn't watch it at first, we're going to play it again. So thank you very much. The next and last point of the festival is at 5 p.m. CET with the Soft Protest Digest about the question of the water resources related to food. So thank you very much and enjoy the video again. Bye-bye. Thank you everyone for being here, and it's actually the last event in the program of this festival. We have the pleasure to have the Soft Protest Digest collective here with us. And Soft Protest Digest are, as Asli is that you saw yesterday, they're both currently in residency in the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht. And how we're going to go this way is we're having a conversation all together with the artists who will explain their research and work and process. And you're very welcome to ask questions and to share thoughts. And after the conversation, we're going to watch the documentary that they curated for the festival. So welcome. And so we see on the screen Robin and Nikki. Soft Protest Digest are actually a collective of 3 artists, 2 French, 1 Danish. And I'll let you guys introduce yourself, I guess.
Yes. Yes, we are a cross-disciplinary research collective. And we are currently, like you said, participants here in the Van Eyck, where we work with different ways of talking about environmentalism. And this is often through food, performances, text, fiction, podcast, etc. And we often do collaborative projects with farmers, other designers, experts, etc. because we definitely don't have all the answers. We're still exploring a lot of stuff. Yeah. So that's the short introduction.
And so you have, I think, like a major research going on in the Van Eyck right now. Maybe if you can give us a word about it, if you feel like it.
Yeah. Well, basically, we are located close to a region called the Ardennes. And this region is basically consisting of a lot of forests. It expands into Belgium and to Germany, to France, to Luxembourg, also to this lower part of the Netherlands where we are located right now. And it's interesting because no one actually knows like the borders of this region. And we are sort of interested in stories and myth related to this area in order to sort of establish like a fictional food culture, let's say, or diet or whatever to call it. We don't know what it will end up with yet, but our research has started with excursions to these areas of the Ardennes and to sort of mapping the environment of the species here, also the stories and so on. So we are connected to the food lab of the Van Eyck, where we will also like expand our research into cooking for the participants and also for people of Maastricht or anyone basically who would like to come by. Yeah.
And yeah, I know there is a garden in the Van Eyck. Do you have a link with it, or will you have in the future maybe?
Yeah, we would like to also work with seeds that are local for this region. So we are currently in contact with a woman called Yvonne who is doing a lot of seed conservation, and we will also like to be part of that conservation, as we think it's a very important thing to do. And since we have a garden here, it would be obvious to also, to work from there, basically. Yeah, so that is the plan as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so there is one particular topic that you've been working for and that we are curating in the festival right now, which is the water resource, food related to the water resources. So maybe you can introduce that topic so we can get closer and closer to the objects that you produced for the festival.
Sure.
All right. So for all this part about water is a research that we began to develop when we were invited for another festival actually, and it's Food Culture Days in Switzerland that was sadly cancelled, but we developed some sort of very wide amount of informations that are actually already on our Wikipedia. We have our own wiki where we put all the researches we go through for each project when we are invited, for a wide diversity of subjects. And here we just took a small part of it actually. That is the question of food scarcity in the US, and more particularly in the Central Valley in California. So this is a region that is historically really full of water. Actually, it's a basin. It's a basin where the Sacramento River pass by, and it's really historically a place where there was a lot of agriculture with a lot of diversity, and it was really important for the whole country for a long time. But since it has been overexploited since centuries now, for the agriculture, but also for the quest of gold and for mining, it's now a region that has a lot of ecological problems. And it's also a region that has turned to be a really like a single crop region, let's say, where there is only one monoculture here, which is the almond tree. So this region is like the biggest producer of almonds in the world. It produces more than half of the total amount of almonds that you can get in the world. And this has a lot of effects on the environment here. and this is a culture that has a lot of improvements that could be searched for, because actually the almonds are always more interesting water-wise to cultivate than just to go for dairy or animal meat producing, to produce animal meat or dairy. But in the end, it's still a crop and a type of nut that is really in need for a lot of water, and that calls on the use of a lot of irrigation from the Sacramento River. And this makes California a place that is considered as in high water stress, which means that more than 50% of the water that is actually here in this Central Valley is used by the agriculture and by the industry. So it's really strange, because when you consider the size of this river, there should not be such a problem. But the overexploitation of it led to this problem, actually. And if we look back to the past, we can see other examples of this overexploitation of either water or simply the soil that happened in America, in the US in general. And this brings us back to the movie that we are going to show for the festival.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just interrupting now because you mentioned your wiki, and this makes me think that we didn't really talk about your collective name actually, and so the Soft Protest Digest. And I guess Digest is all about food, but you're also sort of building a digest, right, with all your articles and thoughts and opinions. So actually your website is a wiki. So maybe can you maybe write it in the chat so everyone can go and see it?
Sure.
This is actually super interesting how you categorize your research, full of information. Thanks.
Yeah, and we can also come back to that in the Q&A, I guess.
Yeah,
if
sure.
you have some questions about it, yeah. Should I talk about the movie?
Of course, yes, please.
Cool. Yeah, so for the festival, we have selected a documentary movie called The Plow That Broke the Plains by Pare Lorentz. And it portrays the consequences of the Dust Bowl, a phenomenon that caused severe drought and dust storms, which took place in the beginning of the 1930s of the United States. So like Robon said, it relates to another sort of land abuse related to water. This was caused by the Dust Bowl, but not only that, of course, there was a lot of consequence, a lot of actions that led to these droughts, not only the weather, but also the way that the land was farmed. And to give you a small pretext for the documentary, basically after the First World War, there was an increased demand and price of wheat, and therefore thousands of acres of native grasslands were plowed to make space for wheat cultivation. And this took place in this area called the Great Plains, which expands throughout the United States. You will see images of this in the movie as well. So later on, the prices of wheat and maize went drastically down because of the Great Depression. And the event that finally broke the spine of the American economy was the Dust Bowl, because it just left the land completely dry and unable to farm, basically. But what is important to note here is that grasslands were able to store carbon and hold water with their deep root systems, and modern wheat and modern farming practices were not able to hold water or store carbon or build the top layer of the soil. So therefore, the farming practices ultimately led also to the critical level of this crisis, basically, and also consequently, it also led a lot of farmers unemployed and forced them to migrate as well to California, where we see the abuses of land, you could say, today, which is related to almond production and big monocultural productions, basically. So this is why we chose this movie, because it sort of draws a line from this historical crisis up until today, where we also see a lot of wildfires connected to drought and so on. So have we moved so far away from this episode? That's the question. So yeah, it's a really interesting documentary, and the images are beautiful. First of all, we also wanted to show another movie called The Grapes of Wrath, which I also really recommend you to watch. And it also shows more the human perspective of this whole crisis and the immigration that was caused by the crisis as well. So it's also really recommendable, for sure. Yeah.
And within the festival, so as for every point of the program that were both online, both physical, with parcels that we send to subscribers, you built like multi-layered objects to go with the documentary. Maybe you can, so I don't know, is this, maybe it's a spoiler alert for those who subscribed, and I think the parcels were sent yesterday, so probably you don't have them at home yet. But yeah, if you want to not hear about it yet and have a surprise, it's just time to do this. But otherwise, maybe you guys can tell a bit more about it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we, I can show you the little parcel here, which was sent to some of you, and in this little box, you have a dessert, which is a fake almond dessert, consisting of a sort of fortune cookie dough with a vegan marshmallow inside and a wild rose hip jam. Also in this box, you find other edible things. You find some nuts. You also find some hazelnuts that are meant to be grown, actually, if you have the capacity or a garden close by. There's also a little bag of drought-resilient seeds. This is, for example, amaranth, which is a seed that is really interesting because it's drought resilient, but also because it's highly nutritious and you can eat all parts of the plant. It's also a very beautiful flower, and it's not so, let's say, native to these regions. So maybe it won't grow so well here, but I recommended you to try anyway. And the idea, the concept of this whole little box is also to kind of question, like, how can we as consumers, I guess, influence these agricultural practices and markets, basically. So should we perhaps think about consuming a diversity of nuts that are perhaps more native to this region, which is, for example, hazelnuts? They grow well here where there's plenty of rain. Or should we consume drought-resilient crops from California instead of consuming a crop that calls for water and also a lot of light? So it's a question that we are posing as well. And
yeah. Because it's also linked to all those plant-based milk, which are a good thing in the end, because it's always better to shift towards a plant-based diet than to stay on too many dairy products in terms of water consumption and also in terms of carbon footprint. But as Nikki said, there are lots of seeds, there are lots of nuts, there are like the hazelnuts, the walnuts, etc., that you can produce milk with. There is also rice, etc. And this nice shift towards plant-based milk has sadly this effect of creating other monocultures, like almonds, for instance. Mm-hmm. So this is really the world problem that we face right now, and that we try to propose other perspectives for it, basically, with this little box. And that's why the part that was already that is already not a real almond, spoiler alert, mm-hmm. In the box. It's a dessert, actually. It's some kind of little pastry that we produced with no almond at all, only with other types of products, among which there is like aquafaba, there is wheat too, there is some sugar in it, and this little almond is really referring to what is called subtleties. I don't know if you pronounce it well. So the subtleties were some kind of super luxurious dessert that you will get and sometimes not even eat. During the Middle Age, it was a sign of power. There were sculptures made of sugar and also a bit of almond paste. So this was also a way to propose to think about almonds as some kind of produce that we should spare and not use every day. For instance, in the form of almond milk, and that's why you'll find in the box this little almond.
Yeah, and you will also find this little text, which gives you also a contextual framework for some of the things we have been mentioning here. And if you haven't received this box, we can also send you an email with this mini article on this topic if you're interested. So please let us know if that's something for you.
Thanks. Super interesting. There is actually a question in the chat that is pretty relevant. So you explained us that you actually work right now, of course, in Maastricht. So you're focused on the region as a context of work. How come that you got interested into California? Like, did you go there? How did it go in your radar somehow?
Yeah. As we said when we introduced this research on water, at first it was meant to be a free-course dinner for another festival. And so we had all those data and the envy to produce some of the food that we had planned to produce. And when it came to the Food Art Film Festival, we checked also all the documentaries that were free of rights and available on the internet. And we saw the match happening between this documentary that was about the Great Plains and this dessert that we had already in mind and that we were already planning to produce for this other festival. And that's how it came to be in the end.
Okay, so it's
and sorry to interrupt. Yeah. It also relates to like a broader research on water related to food, basically. And California is super interesting because they also sort of initiate these water markets now, where water has a price and becomes a monetary resource. And this is also something we find super interesting. So we were already kind of researching that. And but basically, like Robon said, it was just also a way to bind everything together with the movie. And it would, of course, be ideal to be in California in order to research these things. But this is also more like let's say a superficial research, in a sense that it's a sort of illustration as well. And if we would go deeper into this, then yeah, it would probably demand some like context that we embed ourselves in. Yeah.
I think it's not that superficial, because as you mentioned, half of the almonds are produced there, and we are the consumer of it if we like almond milk. So this is our business too, and I think this is our context. All of us asking for cappuccino with almond milk in there. So, but I think it's always interesting, indeed, to see how you can bridge some region now that we are in such a globalized world. We are also responsible for the fires in California, I guess, because we are part of this system.
Sure. And actually, even though we are not, it doesn't appear in the box, we are also like extending this research on water for the Ardennes project, because it's actually called, the part of the Ardennes that is the closest to us and the highest in Belgium is called Ardennes Bleu, which means blue Ardennes. And this is because it's really like the headwater of the whole little countries all around it. It's really a place where there are lots of water dams. We also talk about water dams in the whole research. So if you want to dig a bit in our wiki, you can find a lot of information about water, energy, and the food system in general.
Nice. If anyone is willing to ask any questions, please raise your hand or ask it or write it if you feel a bit shy to talk. All right. It appears everything was super clear. Can you talk a bit more about your research in the region of Maastricht, which is actually the research on the Ardennes that you just mentioned? Do you have more to say, or is it just starting?
Yeah, it's just starting, honestly. So for now, we don't have so much to say, but what we were also interested in is to sort of see what diet can be that is not necessarily connected to borders or to nation states, but more to the landscape. And this is what we're interested in. So how can we create a sort of whole framework for that? That is perhaps something to do with fiction, or like looking into stories or myth, or even creating stories around this region, in order to sort of create a whole like fiction around this diet. And this is also going to be part of our research as well as just testing out ingredients and also, of course, products from here, also artisan crafts from here, so on. So we've sort of tried to dive in history around the place, but also in sort of a future around the place, if I can say that. Yeah. So, but honestly, we just started it now, so we're not super far in this research. But if you're interested, then please, we can keep you updated, or you can follow some of our social medias, where we will also post some stuff on our Wikipedia.
Yeah, we have another question from Penelope.
Yes.
What is it?
Yeah.
So our backgrounds.
Yeah. Should I start?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I studied art and design in Rietveld, which is an art school in Amsterdam, and I graduated 6 years ago. And then after that, I started, in fact, a new study into agriculture, and I took a an agricultural, practical agricultural education. So I'm really interested also in sustainable farming practices and ways to cultivate, and environmentalism also from this perspective of how we can change the food system through agricultural practices and all that. But this is something that goes hand in hand also with how we consume and how we eat. And therefore, I coined, or we sort of combined forces with Robon and Jeremy that were also working on food. And we decided to work together in an artistic context, not only artistic, but often artistic context with food and agriculture and environmentalism.
Yeah, because Jeremy and I, we were both from the same school called the Art Décoratif de Paris in Paris, where we studied different things, design and video. And we started to work together as a duo of artists, but we were mainly working on the political aspect of food, for instance, on diplomatic dinners, these kind of things, and also on tradition and all the storytelling that goes around food. That has always been something super interesting for us. And when we met Nikki, we took the shift towards more like putting on the front the environmentalism aspect of food, because we just realized how important it was, as she was super convincing with her agricultural background. And yeah, that's how it went.
And you were also mentioning dinners that you were planning for the food culture days. I was wondering, like, the final format of sharing when you get work done. How do you get there? Is this something that you have in mind forward, or is it something that you let completely open, like you do the research and at one point the format raise up, like it should be a dinner or it should be a box?
Like obviously for this event, like the box was also a practical solution, because we were not able to have anything physical, so that was why we developed this idea. But I think we definitely prefer to be in a physical space, with other people, and sort of having performances as well next to the dinners. And this is also a format that we are still developing. I forgot your question.
But so the question was more about, like, does it start with the researches and then the shapes pops up somehow at some point?
Okay.
And I would say kind of, but still, like, there is always like an hypothetical form that pops up while we are doing the researches, and then like the ongoing researches questions this shape, and sometimes it changes drastically before we arrives to the final shape. Yeah.
Cool. I'm looking forward the moment we can share a dinner.
Yeah.
And I think I'll mention here that we'll postpone later in the year in Maastricht, in the Van Eyck, the projection of the two movies, Der Souzala and The Grapes of Wrath. So hopefully we can also all meet there and hopefully eat in front of the movies. So it's going to happen sometimes.
Nice.
Any more questions here?
Can I? I'm also always Penelope. Sorry. I really like your work, and that's also why I'm very curious about what you were doing. And I was curious also about how and when the soft protest that just happened. Like, how did you started doing? Did you have a project in mind, like between maybe 3 friends, and then you started doing something called with a name? or it was for maybe the Van Eyck Academy, like to for the residency?
We started 2.5 years ago to work together, and it happened very, very casually. Basically, we met in Paris and we started cooking together under these informal dinners, and then from there it just developed into a sort of coherent project, and it was also solidified by the residency we did in Amsterdam 2 years ago, where we sort of conceptually formed this project and what we would like to work with. So, but initially it happened very, very casually and just from common interest around food and cooking together, basically. So, yeah.
You mentioned Amsterdam. It's interesting because I remember that I was in Amsterdam. I was in Amsterdam as an intern 2 years ago when I first saw your post on Instagram. So it's interesting, like it was always like there. You were studying there. You said no, maybe you studied like years ago, but you were in Amsterdam doing something else, maybe working in a restaurant, or I didn't understand like why of that.
So I studied in Amsterdam, and Jeremy, he lived there at the moment. So it just sort of, and we have a lot of friends from there as well. So it just sort of evolved from there, and that's also where we did this residency for the first time. So so strangely enough, it just evolved from this city, basically.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's easy from Amsterdam, like to start. I saw many projects about food design, food arts, starting from there. So it was very interesting. I was doing food design internship there, and it was just mind blowing coming from Italy to see how many projects there could be, like just in one city around food.
Yes,
that's true.
It's cool. Yeah.
So we have another question from Sophia Dorfman.
Yeah, about your methods of research. Is this a secret, or do you want to share a little bit about that?
Well, not really. Like it's, but when we are far from the place, obviously it's like partly the internet, partly books, and also even Wikipedia. Like sometimes we participate to Wikipedia pages. We try to dive into it, and I would say that also just the fact to have a wiki and to use with this tool that is Wikipedia, that is really amazing, drives the way you work towards a really nice path where you're really more and more aware of the importance of the sources of what you choose to say, etc., and like confronting different sources, etc. We work a lot also with the website of the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization, where you have a lot of resources concerning like the amount of crops produced by who knows what country every year, etc. Lots of things about food and food production. And well, when we are in the place where we are doing the researches, it's always a big plus to be able to contact people who know about it. Like, for instance, when we did this project for the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, Pare and Pollen, we managed to meet a biologist that is also a beekeeper. So the kind of knowledge that he brought to us is quite difficult to find just on the internet. So that's always better to meet the right people.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe that's the time we dive into California.
Yeah.
I'm really curious. Otherwise, I mean, if anyone has a last question, otherwise, I should just thank you, Soft Protest Digest, for your participation in the festival. It's a very inspiring work and research you're doing, and I'm sure that a lot of people will be inspired with it as well. So we're going to broadcast the Plow that broke the plane. After that, I'll do a closing of the festival, because this is actually the last point. And yeah, so let's see each other after the documentary. Enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Céline.
Thank you.
Grasslands, a treeless, wind-swept continent of grass, stretching from the broad Texas panhandle up through the mountain reaches of Montana to the Canadian border, a country of high winds and sun, high winds and sun, without rivers, without streams, with little rain. First came the cattle. An unfenced range 1,000 miles long, an uncharted ocean of grass, the southern range for winter grazing, and the mountain plateaus for summer. It was a cattleman's paradise. Up from the Rio Grande, in from the rolling prairies, down clear from the eastern highlands, the cattle rolled into the old buffalo range. Fortunes in beef. For a decade, the world discovered the grasslands and poured cattle into the plains. The railroads brought markets to the edge of the plains. Land syndicates sprang up overnight, and the cattle rolled into the west. The world into the plains. New populations, new needs crowded the last frontier. Once again, the plowman followed the herder, and the pioneer came to the plains. Make way for the plowman. The first fence. Progress came to the plain. High winds and sun. High winds and sun. A country without rivers and with little rain. Settler, plow at your peril. "200 miles from water, 200 miles from town, but the land is new." Many were disappointed. The rains failed and the sun baked the light soil. Many left. They fought the loneliness and the hard years. The rains failed them. Many were disappointed. But the great day was coming. The day of new causes, new profits, new hope. golden harvest. Then we really plowed the plains. We turned under millions of new acres for war wheat. We had the manpower. We invented new machinery. The world was our market. Become the new wheat land. 100 million acres, 200 million acres, more wheat. Country without rivers, without streams, with little rain. Once again, the rains held off and the sun baked the earth. This time, no grass held moisture against the winds and the sun. This time, millions of acres of plowed land lay open to the sun. baked out, blown out, and broke. Year in, year out, uncomplaining, they fought the worst drought in history. Their stock choked to death on the barren land. Their homes were nightmares of swirling dust, night and day. Many went ahead of them, but many stayed until stock, machinery, homes, credit, food, and even hope were gone. On to the west. Once again, they headed for the setting sun. Once again, they headed west. Last year, in every summer month, 30,000 people left the Great Plains and hit the highways for the Pacific coast, the last border. Blown out, baked out, and broke. Nothing to stay for, nothing to hope for. Homeless, penniless, and bewildered, they joined the great army of the highway. No place to go, and no place to stop. Nothing to eat, nothing to do. Their homes on four wheels, their work a desperate gamble for a day's labor in the fields along the highway. The price of a sack of beans or a tank of gas. All they ask is a chance to start over, and a chance for their children to eat, to have medical care, to have homes again. 50,000 a month. The sun and winds wrote the most tragic chapter in American agriculture. $400 million acres. The Great Plains seemed inexhaustible. Yet in 50 years, we turned a part of it into a dust bowl. We put too many cattle and sheep in it. We granted homesteads of rangeland that never should have been plowed. We tore up grass for war needs. We invented new machinery, making it possible for one man cheaply to plow thousands of acres. An unprecedented drought completed the havoc. There was no grass left to hold the light soil against the high winds. The 50-year record. 40 million acres of land ruined perhaps forever. 200 million acres badly damaged. A great part of this vast area of damaged land can be saved. And the federal government has worked strenuously during the past few years to restore these lands. The Soil Conservation Service, the Forest Service, the CCC, and the Resettlement Administration are cooperating with the Department of Agriculture in working 65 land improvement projects in the plains. The Resettlement Administration will take title to 5,800,000 acres of this land and put it to its proper agricultural use. On a second front, the federal government is working to rehabilitate the stricken farmers of the drought area. Various emergency agencies have distributed millions of dollars in direct relief and saved thousands of farmers from dire poverty. The Resettlement Administration has loaned millions to farmers whose lands were not damaged beyond repair, but who needed seed, farm equipment, and credit in order to carry on. Most important, the Resettlement Administration is taking over 4,500 farms in the drought area, and it will move families from this land that cannot be farmed into natural agricultural districts. Model farmsteads such as this one being constructed in Nebraska are being built to house these resettled farmers, and they not only will be paid for their old farms, but they will be given a chance to buy their new homes on long-term credit. Modern equipment, irrigation, good lands, electricity, sanitation, schools. The Resettlement Administration is bringing these benefits to thousands who are left stranded and without hope. But the winds still blow and the sun still bakes the land. We must practice control and conservation if we are to save the rest of the grass. The rains will come again, the plow will dig again. Another decade of reckless use, and the grasslands will truly be the great American desert.